In the forgotten hills of Missouri, hidden behind walls of rotting wood and silence, a secret festered for decades. No one entered, no one left. Inside that cabin, a man and his sister lived far from the eyes of the world, raising children whose faces mirrored their own in ways nature should never allow. This is the story authorities were never meant to uncover. A story of bloodlines twisted beyond recognition in the forgotten hills of Missouri, hidden behind walls of rotting wood and silence. A secret festered for decades. No one entered, no one left. Inside that cabin, a man and his sister lived far from the eyes of the world, raising children whose faces mirrored their own in ways nature should never allow. This is the story authorities were never meant to uncover. A story of bloodlines twisted beyond recognition. On March 17, 1982, as the snow of a brutal winter began to melt in the Ozark wilderness, an assistant social worker named Margaret Wilson made her way to a remote cabin in Shannon County. She had been sent after an anonymous complaint reached the Missouri Department of Social Services, claiming children were living in dangerous conditions and possibly suffering abuse. The land she was heading toward belonged to the Shelton family, and it lay 27 kilometers from the nearest town, Current River. The only path was a dirt road, which turned into a muddy trap after seasonal rains. For more than 30 years, the Shelton property had been cut off from almost all contact with the outside world. Margaret arrived to find Elijah Shelton, a man of medium build, with a gray beard and piercing blue eyes that carried the weight of generations of isolation. Beside him lived his sister, Martha Shelton, and 3 children, Thomas, aged 12, Sadie, aged 9, and Jacob, just 5 years old. The cabin was a relic from the 1920s, built by Elijah's grandfather. Its 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, and single living room were lit only by daylight. There was no electricity, no running water. A vegetable patch and a barn were their lifeline, and rare trips to town supplied what they could not produce. At afternoon was mild, the temperature resting at 17 degrees, but the air carried the damp scent of thawed earth and rotting timber. As Margaret stepped inside, her eyes fell on the children. Their thin frames hinted at mild malnutrition. Their skin was pale, their clothing worn. Thomas bore a scar from an old axe wound. Sadie's eyes showed an untreated misalignment. Jacob seemed smaller than his age, his gaze distant, his speech slow. What unsettled Margaret most was their faces, the same sharp cheekbones, the same deep blue eyes, the same ear shape. Features mirrored exactly in both Elijah and Martha. The resemblance was too close. When she asked about the children's mother, Elijah paused before claiming his wife had died during Jacob's birth. Martha stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor. Margaret sensed the story was not the truth. A check of county records revealed no marriage certificate for Elijah Shelton. Only 2 birth certificates existed, one for Elijah, one for Martha, both naming Harold and Edith Shelton as parents. The children had no official records at all. The Shelton siblings had withdrawn from the world after their parents died in a fire in 1973. Since then, they had lived almost entirely apart from the community. Locals remembered Elijah as cold, avoiding conversation beyond what was absolutely necessary. Watching Martha tend to the children with a closeness more fitting for a mother than an aunt deepened Margaret's suspicion. The way Jacob clung to her, the way her eyes softened when they met his, all told a story without words. A week later, on March 24, 1982, an official investigation began. Margaret returned to the cabin with a local sheriff's deputy named David Tanner and pediatrician Dr. Robert Hayes. Elijah resisted their questions, repeating the phrase, "We take care of our own." Martha replied only with short, guarded answers. The children, curious yet wary, kept close to her. Dr. Hayes examined them, noting malnutrition, untreated medical issues, and physical traits suggesting possible inbreeding. Thomas had an extra finger on his left hand. Sadi's teeth were poorly developed. Jacob's cognitive delays were more severe than Margaret had first believed. Each problem might have had another cause on its own, but together, and combined with the children's identical features and the family's deep isolation, they raised serious concerns. Records from a nearby county hospital revealed something strange. In 1970, Martha had been treated for an injury, and the doctor noted she was 3 months pregnant. No birth or adoption records followed. Further checks showed similar incidents in 1973 and 1977, the birth years of Thomas, Sadi, and Jacob. Martha had used different names each time, but her appearance and medical history matched. When Elijah sensed where the investigation was headed, he barred officials from the property. Without hard proof of abuse, the law offered few options. Then came a breakthrough. Sarah Jenkins, an 83-year-old neighbor who lived 5 kilometers away, contacted Margaret. She had been a friend of Edith Shelton, the siblings' mother. Sarah explained that Edith feared such an outcome for her children. Harold, Edith's husband, had kept the family isolated, insisting the outside world was corrupt. Even after their parents' deaths, Elijah clung to the same beliefs. Sarah recalled visiting in 1971 and seeing Martha visibly pregnant. When she asked about it, Elijah ordered her off the property and never let her return. This account added weight to the suspicion, but it was still not enough for legal action. More digging revealed that Harold and Edith had shared the same surname before marriage. They had been first cousins, a detail not unusual in isolated mountain communities, where marriages within the family often happened for lack of options. Investigators began to see a pattern, a chain of close relative marriages passed down through generations, each one reinforcing the next. In early autumn of 1982, the case shifted again. During a routine welfare visit, Margaret found Jacob feverish and struggling to breathe. She persuaded Elijah to let him be taken to West Plains Hospital. There, genetic specialist Dr. Michael Brennan examined Jacob. The results pointed to congenital issues consistent with children born from relationships between immediate family members. During Jacob's 2-week stay for pneumonia, Martha stayed constantly at his side. One night, exhausted and worried, she spoke quietly to Margaret. She described how life had changed after her parents died, how Elijah had taken charge, shutting out the world, convincing her that only he could be trusted. Though she never said outright that she was the children's mother, her words and the emotions behind them left little doubt. More evidence emerged from an old diary belonging to Reverend Samuel Miller, who had visited remote Ozark communities in the 1960s and 70s. His notes from June 1969 described the Shelton siblings living in extreme poverty after their parents' deaths. A later entry from April 1971 told of Elijah turning him away, while Martha, heavily pregnant, appeared briefly at the doorway. Reverend Miller had reported his concerns to local authorities, but without proof, no action had been taken. Then, hospital files from 1977 surfaced. Under the alias Mary Smith, Martha had delivered a baby boy, Jacob, with breathing problems and a heart defect. She had left the hospital against medical advice as soon as she and the child were stable. With this, Judge Elalena Simmons authorized DNA testing for Elijah, Martha, and the 3 children. The results, delivered in November 1982, were conclusive. Elijah was the father, Martha the mother. Elijah was charged with incest, a felony in Missouri. Martha, viewed as a victim of psychological control, faced no criminal charges, but lost custody of the children. The trial began in February 1983. The defense argued that Elijah's upbringing in isolation had warped his understanding of morality. The prosecution countered that he knew his actions were wrong because he had gone to lengths to hide them. Martha's testimony painted a picture of years of manipulation, fear, and forced dependency. Expert witnesses explained how total isolation can create an alternate reality where harmful acts feel justified. The jury found Elijah guilty, but recommended leniency. Judge Simmons sentenced him to 3 years in prison with possible release. After 18 months, along with mandatory psychological treatment, the children went into foster care. Over time, they received education and medical care. Thomas adjusted quickly. Sadie struggled but improved. Jacob underwent surgeries and long-term therapy. Genetic testing showed each child carried multiple inherited health issues. The Shelton case led to new state laws requiring regular welfare checks in isolated areas. Elijah served 22 months before release. Martha regained custody in 1984, moving to West Plains and rebuilding her life. The children grew into adulthood with varying challenges, but found ways to live meaningful lives. Decades later, Margaret Wilson reflected on how such a case could happen so close to civilization. The old Shelton property, abandoned and decaying, remained a silent reminder of what unchecked isolation can create.